Hello, cooking enthusiasts. In this video, we are going to be going over my modern take on bistecca florentina, or a Florentine steak. If you are not familiar with the dish, a Florentine steak is generally a massively thick porterhouse slash T-bone that is cooked over a wood fire. The steak you can see us working with would actually be considered probably too thin for most traditional Florentine steaks, but it's still about 2 inches thick. It's also a little more trimmed than you usually see for Florentine steak, but it's still an amazing local porterhouse, dry aged by the producer for 45 days. Some of the footage you've already seen is us sort of fiddling with the oven settings, but that was more user error on our end. For this entire process, we are utilizing the Anova precision oven. In general, I would say I've had moderate to good success with projects using the APO, but this application in particular I was very happy with. The crux of the technique is starting with the oven broiler set to maximum and giving each side of the steak an initial sear. Now, obviously, this is not anything too revolutionary. There are a lot of proponents and chefs that talk about sous vide that do advocate searing before and after something like a steak, but actually on YouTube, I almost always only see a post sous vide sear. And the beauty of using this piece of equipment is the broiler is actually pretty intense, so we don't have to worry about using a pan on the stove. Another important factor that you don't really see with the editing is that between sides, we're also letting the oven completely rebound and come back up to temperature. The last few things to note for this step that you saw at the beginning of the footage is we actually started directly from the fridge because we are trying to minimalize internal cooking while we get this first sear. And we're also kind of aiming for just a mediocre sear. As you can see, the surface is mostly gray with some browning around the edges, but this is okay. That entire first sequence was probably close to 4 or 5 minutes of active time in the broiler, but it was closer to 20 minutes overall because we are letting the oven rebound and the steak rest at room temperature. We avoid the internal temperature climbing too much. Even with all of those factors, the steak still went from refrigerator temperatures all the way up to 36 and 38 internal after the broiling. So once again, the steak and the oven are resting and we are resetting it into sous vide mode. Again, this is a work of using the Anova oven. you could also theoretically use a standard oven with more of a reverse sear technique where you are setting a standard home oven as low as possible and then monitoring the steak with a temperature probe. You could, of course, also use a regular broiler followed by vacuum sealing for a more conventional sous vide water bath. The only downside of the water bath is that generally speaking, you're not going to use a temperature probe because it's hard to do with vacuum bags. So you have to estimate the finish time on your steak rather than knowing with the temperature probe. Because we are using a sous vide steam oven, using a probe is convenient, and this lets us do delta cooking, which means our cooking temperature is just slightly higher than target. Throughout this cooking, it was anywhere between 2 and 5 degrees above. These higher temperatures still get us an incredibly gentle and even cook, but the slight increase gets us to our target a little bit faster. And the last thing to note is that I am using an external temperature probe because the one that came with the oven broke, which was again our fault. But we pulled the steak just when the internal tenderloin hit 53 Celsius. Finally, it is time to finish the crust with a second round of maximum temperature broiling, and the steak is technically fully cooked, so we are resting it on a plate temporarily and preheating the tray and rack in the broiler. One mistake we did make was not cleaning the tray and foil underneath, resulted in a lot of smoke from the broiler reacting with the steak juices. So do as we say, not as we do. We also happen to have this grate with pretty thick bars, and this is going to result in some nice looking grill marks. And normally I really don't care about the grill marks look. However, it did work out serendipitously since a Florentine steak is normally grilled over wood fire, so it has a very similar look. Again, that first broil was probably 5 minutes active time total because that drove off so much moisture from the surface. This second broil was probably 60 to 90 seconds per side, and I was really happy with the results. As a really nice sort of finishing touch, gilding the lily, we are using the Searszall blowtorch attachment to touch up the edge and one of the faces. This is definitely the most optional step in my process, but it is very nice and it does let you really control the searing in certain parts. My dad and I are also very excited for the next version of the Searszall, which is coming out. And with that, the steak is cooked. Obviously, letting it rest for a little bit, but not extremely long, because there is sort of a lot of downtime that the steak gets in between some of the various steps. Now, again, this definitely is not revolutionary. Plenty of people use or sous vide ovens, or a low temperature regular oven for reverse sear. They use broilers, they use the sear and things like it. And again, there certainly isn't anything wrong with using the oven or water bath paired with a frying pan for the sear. But it was kind of nice that everything about the steak could be done in the Anova oven. And of course, it is nice at the time of recording, it was extremely cold and snowy outside, so we weren't doing wood fire or gas grilling anytime soon. From a planning perspective, you can imagine it's nice that the stove can be either empty or completely occupied with side dishes, and the entire main steak process is happening in the oven. And we actually did not season this steak at all beforehand, but we are just slicing it and then finishing with salt and pepper, a good Italian olive oil on top. I will put some photos on screen. I don't think the camera angle or the coloring really gives the steak justice. Again, really beautiful brown deep crust with those prominent grill marks, totally optional, and inside truly edge to edge rare, which personally I really like, and with pretty much every traditional Florentine I've seen, the inside is rare, if not raw, and then there is a pretty massive gradient on the outside, which is fine, but I was really happy with the evenness I achieved. So I hope you enjoyed this video. Please feel free to ask any questions if you want to adapt this technique to a different protein or slightly different pieces of equipment. Again, I think there's a lot of interesting things and tips in this process. Otherwise, thank you for watching.